Yeah, that's so funny. I didn't even know it's down to the buttons.
So you can tell it's going to be a great panel when you enter into the room and your panelists are already laughing.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome, friends. This is a conversation about designing for outcomes, and specifically, we are going to talk and explore the question about, is it an AI-shaped opportunity? Now, almost about a year ago, Project Evident did some research with funders, and we were looking particularly at program officers who are already funding AI. Again, this is a year ago, forward thinking. And what we heard from them, one of their concerns about seeing proposals that included AI in them was that grantees, nonprofits, educators were going to run to the shiny object. And they saw technology as the shiny object, and they were worried about shiny object syndrome. Now, in the subsequent year, we've also heard from a lot of practitioners that they feel FOMO around AI, that that maybe stakeholders, maybe board members, or maybe funders are kind of pressuring them to adopt AI. So I think the shiny object is a little bit of a misnomer, but we want to make sure that folks are really thinking about the value that AI can create, as opposed to, I've got to be a part of AI. I've got to be a part of AI. I am joined today by Simon Morfit. He is the Senior Director of Outcomes AI for Project Evident, and Jake Porway, who is the Entrepreneur in Residence of Decoded Futures, Tech NYC, and also the founder of Decoded. And we are really excited to dig into this question because both of them have deep expertise and deep experience in the real on-the-ground work of working with practitioners around scoping AI-shaped problems and opportunities. I will say, this is, whenever you have emerging technology, figuring out how to use it is, it's hard, right? That's a little bit opaque. And so part of what Jake and Simon have been doing is unearthing these early patterns of where is their value. If you'd like to know more about Jake and Simon's backgrounds, if you go back to the scheduling later in the day, you can see and hover on their faces. You can see their full backgrounds. You can link with them on LinkedIn. But for today, we're going to dive right into our conversation. We're going to spend 30 minutes or so in facilitated dialogue. We're then going to turn to your questions, and we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A. At the very end of our session, Jake and Simon and myself will all move to the lounge. We'll all have a separate room that we're in the lounge, and you're welcome to join us and ask individual questions. Maybe we didn't get to your question in the Q&A. Maybe something has come up that you don't want to ask in front of everybody, but you want to really ask something of Simon or Jake or myself. You'll have that opportunity there as well. Okay, so with that, I first want to turn to Jake and just ask if you could just share a little bit of where does your knowledge come from? What have you been doing around helping organizations find opportunity with AI that has led to your understanding of the patterns?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks everyone for coming. With the caveat that I've seen some things, but hey, that knowledge is still growing because the frontier is growing with all of us. I have the great privilege of getting to work with Decoded Futures and see a lot of nonprofits figure out, how do I go from I should be using AI to actually trying to implement it? For a little bit of context, Decoded Futures is a program out of New York City who has the great pleasure of also partnering Project Evident, thinking about how we're doing this work across the country. And the main program that we run is a cohort model for nonprofits that combines them with technologists over an 8-week program to learn a little bit about best practices. As I say it air quotes, because those best practices change every couple of months. But what we think of current best practice and gain frameworks for things like, how do we think about an AI-shaped problem? How would I actually implement it? And then try to build a prototype of that solution for the problem they're facing. And this really is for folks who start from, I've never touched ChatGPT. It's not folks who have development teams and just want to tune up their AI. It's coming in at any level of, I've never done it, or some people at my team are kind of playing with it. And where do you go from there? Because that's where you think there's this huge gap in understanding. So had a great chance to see, let's see, we've run 4 cohorts over the last year and a half. So we've seen probably about 200 folks go through that program. And then we have some lighter programming as well, day-long trainings where folks actually get to work on trying to solve problems there. So that's where we really started to see these patterns emerge. Just for the broader context about, because I like to spend a lot of time around different parts of the space. I also spent some time with Opportunity AI, which is a group of grant makers who are also thinking about not just how do they fund AI, but how they use AI. So we can peek a little bit into how they're thinking about that. And then I've had the great privilege of, through a group called Tribe.ai, working with Anthropic and OpenAI on some trainings for companies as well. And I just mentioned that, I won't go deep into it, but I want to say, because I get a great chance to see how companies are struggling with this challenge. And spoiler alert, not significantly different. You might think like, oh, they've got all the resources and all the tech in the world, so they are just running ahead. I think everyone's pretty much in the same spot, nonprofit, government, business as well. Different incentives, different structures, but pretty much the same. So I'll save my sharing on what we're seeing so far, but that was what is sort of, I think, where I get most of my understanding or current beginnings of thinking about how folks are really using AI and what goes right or wrong in doing so.
If folks joined us at the first session of the day when we were introducing the day, you might have heard me use the term all teach, all learn. You are not too late to be entering into using AI. And this really is a moment where there is no one definitive organization or way to use AI. We are all teaching each other and we're all learning. And that's why it's so important to invite everybody in, right? To be in this working community. Simon, I want to turn to you and ask you to help illuminate, like, where do your patterns come from? What is the work that you've been doing?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Jake, as well as thanks to all of you for spending a portion of your day with us. There are really two main bodies of knowledge that I'll draw on for our conversation today. The first is similar to the capacity building work that Jake referenced. We have the chance to receive support and partner with Google.org and collaborate with 4 community foundations across the country. These are community foundations based in Atlanta, Austin, Columbia, and San Francisco. And we had the chance to work with about 20 grantees of each of these funders for a total reach of just over 80 nonprofit organizations. And over the course of a year, 12-month time period, we designed and offered a pretty robust portfolio of capacity building supports. And to give you a little bit of texture, this consisted of in-person working sessions, access to individualized coaching, an online learning hub, and information repository, as well as self-paced learning resources. Now, all of this entire portfolio of support was offered with the goal of helping nonprofits define and implement an AI solution, one that was appropriate for their organizational capabilities and strategic priorities. And just to offer a little bit more texture and granularity, these are small to mid-sized nonprofits. So think of organizations that have under 15 FTEs in terms of staff count and a median annual revenue of about $1.9 million. Now, a key juncture in this overall process that we shepherded nonprofits through during that 12-month time period was definition. What is an AI-shaped problem? And so we'll draw from some of that pattern recognition across those 83 organizations in the coming Q&A and discussion portions. So that's one body of knowledge. The second body of knowledge comes from work that we did in partnership with the Siegel Family Endowment. This was a landscape research study that looked at how nonprofits are using AI specifically in the context of delivering programs and services to scale their outcomes and impact. As we took stock of the space, we saw a lot of attention when it comes to AI really focuses on administrative operations. There's comparatively less insight and less knowledge out there about AI for program and service delivery. And we went about trying to fill in or expand that knowledge gap, both for the field's benefit to advance our collective understanding about how to best use the technology. But this form of knowledge gain is also advantageous when it comes to defining and implementing an AI solution when we appreciate the fact that one of the main barriers that gets in the way of nonprofit adoption and use of this technology is a deep uncertainty about how to do so. There's a lot of ambiguity about, well, what do I do? Where do I go with this technology? And by building out our collective knowledge base, our aim is to resolve some of that ambiguity and to give clearer signposts and directions for nonprofits and aid them in defining an AI-shaped problem. Let me say just a word or two about some of the methods, because it's quite rich and we're quite excited about it. we used a couple different sources of publicly available information to arrive at this database. And I do want to give a thanks to my colleague, Lita Tang, who's here in the background making this all work seamlessly for leading a lot of this research. We pulled from the social impact press, think of sources like the Stanford Social Innovation Review and the Chronicle of Philanthropy. We also did an examination of the grantee portfolios of funders that are active in supporting technology and AI. Think of organizations like the McGovern Foundation. We also did a compilation of corporate-led AI capacity building efforts. Here, think of organizations and cohorts led by Google as well as Salesforce. So we compiled all that information. We also engaged a handful of field leaders to help us make sense, find out what were the key insights, what's the best way to structure this knowledge and insights to be of greatest use to the field. And all together, we had about more than 125 instances of nonprofits using AI for program delivery, which is quite a robust sample size to do some of that pattern recognition to see, well, what are some of the trends in terms of how AI is used, again, specifically for program delivery. So those are the two main sources of data that I'll be referring to throughout our conversation.
Thank you. So one of the things that all of this calls to mind for me, I literally just exited a session earlier today that was on change management. And when we looked at we were lucky enough to be joined by Dr. Summer Jackson from HBS and looked at some of the academic sort of underpinnings and how you think about change management. She really boiled it down to two questions when you're thinking about change. How does this opportunity make sense for my organization? And how does it make sense for me? And this really feels what we're talking about in terms of AI-based opportunities, how you define that, is really answering that first question. As truly, how does this make sense for my organization? Or does it feel like the shiny object? It feels like something that we're chasing. So Jacob, one of the things, you mentioned two things in your opening comments. One is that the cohorts you've been doing with Decoded Futures have lasted over the course of a year and a half. And the second is that we're not at the end of defining what somebody's going to look like, that the technology continues to change really rapidly. And so I want to actually start, it's going to feel a little technical possibly, but I'd like to start with where, like, we know we are moving from a world where prompting is the primary way that we were trying to support nonprofits to engage with AI. It's not that prompting is not going to be important anymore, but vibe coding is now a real opportunity for creating agents, for creating new ways of knitting together data sources and activities inside of organizations. And so, like, what does this shift mean for the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, what a great question. I think if you are someone in the audience going, oh, vibe coding feels too technical, I think the root of that question is just, how do we answer the question that you posed so nicely there, Sarah, of is this useful for me and my organization?
Yeah.
When what the technology can do is changing more rapidly than any other tech wave I've ever seen. I mean, those of us who remember being back in the big data age or social media or internet age, because after the first couple of years, there'd be some principles on like, here's like how your website should look. Here's what a good social media campaign looks like. Yeah, it changed a little bit over time, but it wasn't like the platform just dramatically shifted the next 3 months. We are in that moment now. And so there's two things to think about. Well, first, let me just highlight the challenge. So when we started our first cohort, this great group, New York Sunworks, came in, and they had what I think is a very classic nonprofit data problem. They have to look up whether all of these teachers that they manage across a number of schools, I should say, sorry, so New York Sunworks delivers kind of like hydroponic and botany kits to local schools to help teach them about biology and enhance the learning curriculum. So they manage a number of kits that they send out to schools all across New York, and they also have a number of volunteers who help with the training program. Those volunteers have to come fill in a spreadsheet that says which school they went to and what happened. And they've tried to keep it very user-friendly. So they just say, hey, just pop your notes in a spreadsheet. Love that, works for people. Makes it really hard when they have to understand, did every one of our volunteers actually check in? Did they go to every school? And the person at Sunworks sort of looking through the list and comparing it against like a list of hundreds of schools, like checking it off and then writing to the people that were missing. Kind of just like drudgery, like data bureaucracy piece that you hope would be solved one day through a functioning data system. Lots of better ways to collect that data. But hey, sympathy to New York Sunworks. when are you going to find someone to do that? You got to go find a data consultancy. Like, forget that. Like, it's like, we're just going to keep soldiering on, right? So they came in and said, God, can AI help us with this? And so the first thing they struck on was, they, over the course of a couple of weeks, they were able to write a very detailed prompt. It's basically all about, to your point about prompt engineering. Could we work with ChatGPT to say, here's our data, here's how it works, here's what we want you to do, check every teacher, yada, 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 yada. And lo and behold, it worked. Saved them huge amounts of time. They got it running. They're feeling great. This and some other project they did, by the way, actually is what allowed them to have the efficiency gain to where they're now scaling to other regions. So they're like thrilled to run it for this. Awesome. But to your point about the vibe coding piece, next cohort, someone comes in with a similar problem. Got a bunch of spreadsheets that are messy, I want to combine them. Well, by then, somebody had actually built a tool for this. There was a third party called numerous.ai. And so, and it had come across our desks that was kind of like AI and spreadsheets. And we said, well, you could write this really long prompt, but this tool probably solves it. So, okay, now we're going to advise on that. And then the next cohort, same type of problem comes in. Someone says, well, I actually have just been playing around with these tools that let you write software, like vibe coding. There's a number of these tools where you can say, hey, I'd like a piece of software that works like this, and it generates it. And they built their own that basically combined these files together. And so the trend that's happening here, it's like the way, like even asking, is it an AI shaped problem? I think is a nuanced question beyond just, could this problem be solved by AI? It also has to be within the context of, what are the current tools' capabilities that define what AI can solve? And so that's the trend we're seeing. The two takeaways I'd have for folks on like what this means is, number one of the things we always emphasize at Decoded Futures, and I know from project evidence materials of the same, cut from the same cloth, try to help folks understand the frameworks. How do these tools work generally? How would you specify what you need? We know that inside the middles are going to keep changing, whether you're writing a custom prompt or you're getting code to do it. So it's going to change a little bit. But if we get back to the core of like, how do we think about what generative AI does and how do we model this, that will be a little more durable. I can't guarantee it's perfect. It's a little bit more. So we do that. The other piece is, I think we were just realizing that those of us working in this space start to feel like things like AI coding are more technical. It's like, oh, we shouldn't play with that because that's coding. We'll just stick to prompting. But a year and a half ago, prompting felt like using AI is like, that's too technical for my team. We're not going to use it yet. And I think what we're finding is that actually a lot of the same tools, even though code is more complex that comes out the other side, the way you work with these tools is not that different. And so I think it's incumbent on our field to continue right-sizing this question of, like, for each problem, looking at the AI-shaped problem, what can the tools do? And what is that gap in technical ability that's needed to use them well? Because I think continually that is thinner and thinner each time. So that's what we're seeing. Yeah. So now we start with some vibe coding because we just go, hey, you should know what this looks like. You can access it a lot easier than before.
Right. So Simon, I want to turn to you because you had mentioned the desk research that we've done. And I think one of the things that we experienced in working with those 83 organizations across 4 cities, again, that work started over a year ago, is that many of the organizations, the majority of the organizations, chose to experiment with AI in what we would call back office administrative functions. So that's contracting, finance, fundraising, things that were not mission related or program related. And so, and yet, when we think about the opportunity for AI as a force multiplier for outcomes, that does mean looking at opportunities for AI within your program logic model and within your mission-oriented program. So the work that you have done, the desk research around surfacing program model elements, can you give a flavor of what is the pattern we're seeing? Because I think everyone knows that you can use AI for fundraising. Like, that's a pretty well-established use case. There's a lot of writing about that, a lot of YouTube videos about that. Where are you seeing AI? What are the patterns emerging around AI being used in the program model, which could bring us to AI as a force multiplier for outcomes?
Yeah, happy to. And by way of signposting, this is the database that has over 125 instances of nonprofits using AI for program and service delivery. As we looked into the data, there are 2 levels of clustering and patterning that emerged to us. One, at the most macro level, there's 6 main categories of AI for program implementation. I'm going to voice them over, and then I'll put them in the body of the chat just for ease of reference. And hopefully I'm pushing all the right buttons because it should just appear in the chat momentarily. The 6 categories are using AI to deliver personalized support, service coordination and navigation, knowledge discovery and insight generation, screening and assessment, career development and skills, and client matching and connection. Now that's the most macro level. Underneath these categories of 6, there are 18 subcategories. And you can imagine trying to clear 24 items in the context of a verbal discussion would make for a pretty clunky presentation. And so treat this as an amuse-bouche, if you will, a teaser, a preview. We're gearing up to write and publish these findings more comprehensively and more thoroughly as part of a publication that's coming out in April. So keep an eye out for that. But let me offer a bit of a double click to highlight 2 examples. And these are within personalized support as well as service coordination and navigation. And as we look, if we rank order these categories, these are the top 2 in terms of proportion representation across the database as a whole. One, in terms of personalized support, comes from the work that the National Domestic Workers Alliance has done with an AI-powered chatbot called Ask Aya. And so this allows domestic workers, think of house cleaners, nannies, home care aides, and such, to know how to advocate for themselves and their labor rights through an AI-powered chatbot. So that's a form of personalized support. My circumstances are XYZ. What can I do about it? ABC is the set of recommendations. The second example I want to draw comes from an organization based out of Mexico that's developed a tool called Violeta, which also deploys an AI chatbot to help women recognize the signs of gender-based violence and then navigate them and get them connected to appropriate forms of psychological support. Again, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of richness in this analysis, giving you a more higher level overview of some of the patterns and trends that we're observing.
Thank you for that. There was a question that appeared in the Q&A about when this research is going to be available. As Simon just mentioned, we'll be publishing this research in April, as well as having webinars that are associated with it. I do encourage you to like and subscribe to our Project Evidence LinkedIn page. All new information that we share gets put out on that channel. I also want to draw people's attention to on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a number of icons. One of those icons looks like a couple of pieces of paper or maybe a little book together. Those are resources that are available to you that both Simon and Jake have curated that they use in the cohorts to really help people in identifying AI-shaped opportunities. So I encourage you to explore those and share those with colleagues. Those are additional self-study and exploration. We also have in that resources a case study that we built with talking points and Aurora Public Schools around how they engage the stakeholders, teachers, administrators in identifying an AI-shaped opportunity for those communities and build new product around it. And we have a 20-minute podcast, again, on designing for outcomes that features the talking points information as well as College Possible. So lots of different ways for you to learn and continue to explore this question around how do you identify an AI-shaped opportunity. I do encourage you to keep adding questions into the Q&A. We'll be moving to those questions at the back half of this session. Okay, Jake, I want to turn to you. How do you identify an AI-shaped problem? Like, what are the tools that you use? What are the mindsets that organizations have? How does that happen?
Oh, great question. Okay, so I think Laura or Lita maybe helpfully put in at the top a sort of a similar breakdown to what Simon had popped in around sort of these 5 buckets of AI problems that we teach in our class. I want to reference that just as like for completeness. It's like that's a place we can start from what can AI do. In practice, though, I think the biggest challenge to the AI-shaped problem question comes from the transition from there's an outcome that I want or an output I can picture. Like I want to make a chatbot for my staff or even something more internal. I want to, we all know we can do AI fundraising, right? So I want AI to do my fundraising. That is too big a task. What are all the steps that go into that? So one of our main sessions that I think we have an article on our Substack about, but if not, it should be coming shortly, is about workflow mapping. And there's actually, we borrow a lot from this wonderful TED talk I love from this guy, Tom Wujek, called if you're trying to solve a wicked problem, tell me how you make toast. So we call this, we now refer to this in shorthand as we're making toast. And the idea is he has people, when they're trying to map out their workflows, draw like on a piece of paper, how do you make toast? Everyone's had toast, how do you actually put bread in the toaster, yada, yada. And that's a launching off point to then use that same practice on something more complicated. Like, I want AI to do my fundraising. Okay, what do you do for fundraising? Well, I look at all the RFPs from these sites every day. And then I look at which ones match my organization. And then if some match, I, look at the requirements and make sure that we have everything, or we're going to hit the deadlines. Then I draft, there's lots of steps. When you're saying you're going to use AI to do this, you just think about how you do that, period, before you even get AI into it. Is it probably a very multi-step process? So we have folks kind of do that exercise, and then and we will just say, like, that is a sometimes scary, but often always illuminating process, because as soon as you're forced to put into writing, literally, when do you hand a step off to somebody else? You start to realize, well, a lot of stuff we do is not as structured as maybe we thought. Sometimes I decide we're going to do this kind of proposal because I just can tell that we have the capacity to do that. And sometimes we might not, because I know that funder, the context isn't going to be good for us. All that's like hidden knowledge. It's going to be really tough to automate if you're not clear about what that is. So that's step one. If I could just give anyone any takeaway, it's when you think, could I use AI for X? Worry way less about what the AI can do. As long as it's in around one of these buckets that Simon and I put up, you're probably close. And start writing down, how the heck would I do this? How would I teach someone else to do it? Like one of those exercises you have to like describe, on the other side of a wall, instructions on how to build a Lego structure. I don't know if anyone's ever done one of these. Like, people can't see each other and you realize how specific you have to be to get it right. That I'd say step one. The other takeaway I'd say from that is when we have people build their AI solution, we don't say, okay, now that you've mapped your fundraising pipeline, just tell AI to do that. That's nuts. It's actually, which of those kind of steps do you want AI to help with, and which don't make sense? And this does two things. One, it really constrains the problem, because if I'm asked, it's much more straightforward to come up with an AI shape, or to test an AI shaped solution and saying, I want to go scan the following websites for RFPs. Forget if they even match or not, just get them off the web and put them in front of me so I'm not clicking around. Okay, that is a step. That's great. That is something we could probably do. And then you can move to the next. The other piece is it allows us to regain control of workflows. I should say at the top, Decoded Futures, as optimistic as we are about the use of AI in the social sector, is very happy with the outcome that alumni of our program say, I don't want to use AI for that. It's not good for this, or I don't want to take the risks. We are not, I know none of us in this room are like techno-positivists. And so it's, I think one of the things that makes people really nervous is saying, like, if I'm gonna use AI for fundraising, like, I'm replacing my fundraising staff, like, I don't have control. What if it applies to a bunch of bad stuff? Yeah, that's if you think about it monolithically. But by breaking your workflow down, you also can adjust the dial yourself on how much am I doing it all by a human? What am I comfortable turning over to a computer? And where do I, and then you can mess with that fine-grained detail. So I would say for us, that's probably the most transformative process for folks, because it really helps, again, with this gap of, here I'm supposed to use AI. I want AI to do my comms, run my social media, to actually like actionable steps that That's the other thing. None of that requires any AI until you start to implement it. That's all stuff you can do.
So, Simon, before I give you a new question, is there anything you would add to what Jake has shared in terms of your experience with helping organizations scope AI-shaped opportunities?
Yeah, here, let me draw from the capacity building work with the 80 plus nonprofits that we're wrapping up. We're at a stage where we're taking stock of who made the most progress and what were some of the drivers behind that progress. And there are a couple trends that are bubbling up, and let me share them with you. And we're going to treat these as work in progress, but we think they're quite rich and promising. There's three that I want to elevate. Is when you think about pain points, how do you move from individual experience to a shared experience, right? Just because one team member has a point of friction, that doesn't necessarily mean that's common or extends to others within that team or within that division. And I make this distinction between individual use and collective use, I think, is an important one. because we see tremendous gains that are unlocked when you shift beyond individual use and think about it in a more supra individual way. So that's one. The other would be to look for and assess the strategic importance of that pain point. We all know that nonprofits operate in resource-constrained environments, and as such, they experience quite a few different challenges. That doesn't mean all those challenges are necessarily equally important or equally consequential in terms of their impact objectives or overall mission. And so, can you create a logic chain where you map the connection between that pain point, shared pain point, and the mission and the outcomes that your organization is trying to achieve? And the third would be to see what types of data exist with this pain point, right? It's going to be really hard to move into a crystallized definition of the pain point and the problem if your data is fragmented, exists in different places, if it's unstructured, if it's inconsistent or out of date or not standardized. And so there's something that you have to look at and assess the quality of the data related to that pain point in order to make progress in the journey. Remember, this is part of an overall arc, right? It's not just a one and done type of checkpoint. So those are the three things that I would add to that. And I know, TD, let me know if this is where we're going next, but you've previously referenced some of the resources that Jake and I put together. If I can point folks to the template, there's a 2-pager that we shared as part of that. And in that template, it helps make some of the concepts that Jake and I are talking about a little bit more tactical and a little bit more real. What we chose to share were 2 templates that we used in our very first in-person working session with folks. We called that Discovery Day. And the template shows the prompts that we gave folks to think about the pain point, but also think about the impact potential, right? What would be unlocked if you addressed this pain point? And that gets to that strategic relevance point I mentioned earlier. And then for that shared experience and shared perspective, we also encourage folks to assess the level of buy-in in terms of, well, how does other staff feel about this pain point? And how do your leadership feel about it? And you begin to triangulate across these lenses and perspectives to prioritize the pain point that feels most promising and most appropriate to pursue. And then the other piece I'll call out is in that second template, we have questions encouraging folks to examine the data landscape, if you will, related to this pain point. We also use a device that folks who come from more of a product development or product design background are likely familiar with. It's the how might we framing. And that syntax, that word choice of we, is important because it begins to shift folks out of my pain point, my individual experience, and into more of a collectivist mindset. What is it as a team or as a division that we're grappling with? So here, what I'm trying to do is illustrate some of the concepts that are bubbling up, but also some of the tactics that we've used to bring those concepts to life.
Before we transition to some of the questions that have come in through the Q&A, I'd love to do a lightning round with both of you of I think sometimes we hide the things that don't work in our sector, right? I mean, and there are whole set, and that's not an individual deficiency, that is a sector-wide because of the pressures in our sector. But really, in an all teach, all learn moment, understanding what's not working is actually as valuable for people's learning as understanding what is working. So I wonder if you could both share from your experience in supporting nonprofits and really identifying opportunities, AI-shaped opportunities. What's gone wrong? What should people be aware of and be careful not to do as they are trying to begin and engaging this analysis and discussion internally? Jake, let me start with you.
Yeah, so many things. I have there's sort of general tips for what not to do. Like your organization, shouldn't just assume that you can run this change management process without setting any time for it. Just everyone will get better at AI. But that's like general advice. And then you're asking for more vulnerable moments. So I think in terms of what we've seen that isn't working in our program or where we face challenges, I would say it is, two things come to mind. One is that there are just lots of how do I put this? I don't want to call them stupid. They're technologically annoying problems that are really uninteresting, but will absolutely torch someone's ability to use AI. We see folks, just taking an example of what I mentioned in the beginning with New York Sunworks' spreadsheet problem. We have a group coming through the cohort right now that's doing something similar. And whatever they're trying in ChatGPT just doesn't work, that says gives all sorts of weird errors, but it does work in other tools. That is not interesting. That's not super strategic. But without a program, that person hits that problem. It's like AI doesn't work. I've tried that before. It doesn't work. So I think and that's, I would like us to, we're continuing to try to kind of build those libraries of learnings. Again, they're like not sexy, they're really annoying. Just how did each tool work that people might use? List of things, but I think that's really important. And the more we can find those and help people find those solutions or have someone with them to unblock them, I think the better. We said lightning round. So really rapidly, the other one is the barrier to experimentation is dropped dramatically. That's why we're all so excited, right? It's like, oh my God, I just go to a website and like build code. The curve for maintenance and change management has not changed. So people might get to prototype faster, but do not be fooled that that means that you can get to like long-term solution faster. That's where all the work really begins. And that's, we talk all the time about whether Decoded Future should help support that or not. That is sort of a second stage of capacity building. And down the line would love to, but it's just, it's a lot. There's a lot to figure out there in that phase. So I'll pause there.
Amazing. Thank you. Simon, what are the mistakes that you've seen that people should be aware of?
I'm going to +1 to Jake's earlier comment of process mapping and workflows. That is quite important, and my read is that that's a newer lens, a newer perspective for many nonprofits to bring to their work. But also, let me build on something you mentioned, Sarah, about you referenced the Aurora Public Schools Colorado case study with talking points as a positive example of the value of stakeholder engagement. One of the things that I've observed across some of the nonprofits we've worked with is they've underappreciated or underaccounted for the range of perspectives that have to be brought to the table, both for the problem diagnosis, but also the solution and implementation. And let me give an example. This was a nonprofit active in the legal field. They were interested in using AI to enhance their planning and execution of external constituent engagement. And they got as far as the prototyping stages, where when they ran into a bit of a roadblock, and by roadblock I mean dead end, in that one of their external constituents, in this case it was a funder, did not feel comfortable participating in this AI enhanced exercise. And obviously funders are critical constituents for all nonprofits, and they had to abandon that project and course correct. And so being able to imagine and explore earlier on, obviously hindsight is 2020, doing that more expansive exploration of whom do we need to engage, whom do we need to bring to the table as part of our brainstorming, I wouldn't underestimate that. So that's the one caution that I elevate. You can imagine, had this nonprofit done so earlier, they would have identified this point of resistance and this potential user rejection earlier in that process, and would have then had more time to course correct and pursue other options.
And for folks that are interested in that topic around stakeholder engagement, we do have another session that's focused on designing for outcomes that is just on the topic of stakeholder engagement. So I encourage you to visit that session later today. If you are unable to attend that session, or it's counter-programmed to get something else you'd like to see, we are recording all of these sessions. They will be available to you Monday, if not Friday. So I encourage you to look at that as well. So I'm going to switch gears now, and I'm going to answer some of the questions, or I'm not going to answer. I'm going to facilitate your answering some of the questions that came through the Q&A. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. So this is a big invitation for folks at the end of this session to join Jake and Simon and myself at our individual tables in the lounge, in case we were not able to get to your questions, or in case you didn't ask the question that you really wanted to hear. So one of the ones that I was really excited to see was around, hey, I get the AI for efficiency. I really want to hear some stories about AI that really enhances outcomes, not just the efficiency of a program model, but the outcomes in a program model. So I do want to acknowledge, though, that efficiencies in models that let you reach more clients is a way to enhance your outcomes, right? Achieving your current outcomes with more people is a boost in your outcomes. But I think this person is like, the AI efficiency story, I think, is one we're hearing a lot about. Let's talk about AI and outcomes. Can either of you bring an example to bear around how you saw AI deployed in a program model that really was going to enhance outcomes, even if we didn't have enough time to do the data analysis to understand if that was the case? Because I appreciate a lot of the stuff is new, and we may not have enough data to do the analysis.
Yeah.
Jake, would you start, please? Oh, Simon, go right ahead. Jump on it.
Happy to take that one.
Yeah.
There's one example that comes to mind out of South Carolina, and this is a tiny organization. They have 1 FTE, and they rely heavily on volunteers. They're active in the mental health space. Their pain point was their intake process. Their intake process was manual, involved 10 steps. This one staff person was spending 4 hours on her Saturday to do that matchmaking based on the documentation that was coming in and trying to connect clients with the right types of services. They had tried different workarounds to solve this. They had tried a phone-based system that didn't work because clients didn't recognize the phone numbers when the nonprofit made outbound calls. They tried Calendly. Calendly didn't really reflect the full functionality that was needed. When our coach came into the scene, they directed them to an AI enhanced online form that facilitated that matchmaking process much more quickly. And so they went from a 10-step process to a 3-step process. And in terms of time, 4 hours to about 30 minutes. The pain point that the impact that we're gearing up to see and to observe is prior to all of this, the executive director estimated that only about 20 to 30 out of 100 prospective clients were actually getting linked to services. So that's a lot of impact that's being left on the table, right? That's a lot of need that's not being met. You can imagine with these the gains and improvements in that intake process, that's going to open the door for new levels of impact and new levels of outcome, and that's what we're eager to see in the months ahead. So that's one example that comes out very clear, and to me, pretty profound for an organization of this size. Like, that's a huge time savings, as also as a huge potential impact gain as well.
Jake, what example would you offer?
Well, I have an example to offer, but I do think that I want to just emphasize your framing of efficiency versus like outcomes and effectiveness, because it's like when you think about it that way, it's like if you think about the work we do, our theories of change in our companies, like pipes sending water through to places. Like, efficiency is making the water flow faster and more to the same places. What would it mean to get to outcomes or effectiveness, right? If you're talking about it from an AI perspective, it's like you probably are like redesigning the plumbing, right? So you're either, when people ask that, I'm always like, is it that you just want to hear that the efficiency gains translated to outcomes, like because we were faster at doing intake, we served more people, like, which should count as an efficiency equals outcome? Or are they looking for like, we redesigned how we do this, we have robots go to your house and like talk to you instead? I don't think they mean that, but I sometimes wonder if there's this feeling like that's where we're heading. And so I really encourage, well, one, I love clarity if people are thinking along those lines, but I think the big unlock is efficiency gain that allows you to do more of a working model at scale or reach more of the same type of people. Like, so just to say, like, I think that is great. With that, there's a little sneak peek of a group that is coming through our latest cohort. So we don't have the data yet on the impact yet. They're actually demoing tomorrow this project. This is a group called Link. So it's literacy in, oh my God, let me make sure I got their name correctly. I feel so bad to get that wrong. Oh my goodness. Literacy and community. And one of the challenges they're facing is that when kids in the New York school system go to school, your kids, let's imagine your 6-year-old, right? You ask them what they did at school, they played, did reading. You don't really get a sense of what's going on in the classroom. And kudos to New York, they do run a literacy assessment on students and then send kind of a report card or an assessment back to the parents in the mail. And so you'll get this report card that says, here's how your kid was performing at the beginning of the year on certain things, middle, and end. The challenge is sometimes they're underperforming and there's not really a step of what to do. And so the folks at Link experience this with their constituents as well as with their own kids, as you'll hear. And they wondered, could parents, as a parent, we feel like we could help our children a little bit at home. We might be able to supplement the reading, give them some, read different books to them, help with phonics lessons, but it's just totally opaque about what to do based on this scorecard. So they built an app that allows you to upload your assessment, and then we'll walk you through kind of like a user-friendly experience to say, hey, given what it seems like your child is struggling with, here are some options for learning resources, and here's some interactive games that we've actually built with Link's sort of understanding of literacy for your kid that you can play with them. And so they're trying to really like change, I think in that sense, the way the program flow used to work, which is to say, we're going to help give you resources, and then absent that, hope that your kids' scores improve on this assessment, is instead saying, hey, given that assessment, here's a dynamic set of materials that you can use, vetted by us, that will, at a minimum, empower you to feel like part of the process with your students, I keep saying that, with your child's literacy, if not actually produce those outcomes. So TBD on the outcomes, but here we're trusting in Link's model, the fact that they are already experts in literacy enhancement and tutoring for kids, and now they're trying to integrate it in with this process. So that's what we'd see. And I'll just share one last thing about it, which is they had put a proposal together to build this, and they had put a timeline of a year in. And then they did a one-day event with Decoded Futures and built 80% of it, the prototype piece that Dan mentioned, which is not the hard part, but it did open their eyes to realizing like, oh my God, we can move so much dramatically faster on this. And so they've been doing a lot faster.
One of the things I really loved about that response, Jake, is that you really centered both understanding the workflows in the context of the program model. One of the ways that we make sure that you use AI in a way that's going to enhance outcomes, if that's your intention, is that you center your technology roadmap in your program logic model. If this is a topic that interests you, we have a session on this today. So please look at the overall schedule. It is about practical, tactical ways to use your program logic model as a way to center and help surface AI-shaped opportunities that will drive outcomes-based value. And again, if you're not able to attend that, the recording of that session will be available to you Friday, if not Monday. I want to thank Jake Porway and Simon Morfit for sharing their expertise and sharing the experiences of the nonprofits and educators that they've been able to work alongside as a way to inspire all of us around how do we really get our arms around what an AI-shaped opportunity is. My name is Sarah Troia. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and the Managing Director of Outcomes AI at Project Evident. Jake, myself, and Simon will all be in the lounge. It'll take us a couple seconds just to transition there, but I encourage you to join us. There were so many questions we weren't able to answer. Please join us in the lounge so we can answer more of your questions. And I encourage you to check out the podcast that's on designing for outcomes, as well as the case study on Talking Points and Aurora Public Schools around how they work together for stakeholder engagement to identify real value points for where AI can be used. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope we'll see you all in the lounge.
Thanks so much.